It's lovely to see you all in sunny Ashland, Oregon. Thanks to Jordan, Missy, and everyone at RVML. And again, thanks Jason so much for having me back. Thanks to Ariel for the recording and doing all the technical work. So thanks so much for all that. So I'm here to talk. I'm here tonight and tomorrow night. So aren't you lucky? Lots to talk about, and I'm open to go in different directions. So I'm going to do a spiel for a bit, maybe a half an hour or so. Brevity is not a strong suit of mine, so I'll keep an eye on that because I want to have time to do Q&A, more of a back and forth conversation. It's a small group of people, so we can do that really well, and that can be really interesting. During the announcements, I heard that you all are, the center here does a sort of bridging the divide kind of a thing. One of the books that I co-authored with Nolan Higdon is actually a critical thinking textbook called Let's Agree to Disagree, a critical thinking guide to communication, conflict management, and critical media literacy, and that's what that book is about. It's about how to talk to people that are different than you. It's about how to build bridges, not walls, and that can be really difficult, especially when someone in front of you is ready to burn the bridge before you start building it, or already threw up a few walls. And you know, interestingly enough, we all have the ability to do both of those things at different times and circumstances, so we need to remember that. One of the things we talk about in that work too is about critical listening, empathy, and so forth. All through a social justice lens, but anyway, that's another topic. Maybe that'll come up. The last time I was here was 5 years ago and spoke. I visited here. I visited at Southern Oregon University, and at the time, it was before my other book, United States of Distraction, Media Manipulation in Post-Truth America and What You Can Do About It, came out. It came out City Lights that following summer. And then, of course, I was going to be coming back up here again, and the plague came. And everything happened and shut down, and things got weird. And we went online, and we did a lot of events, a lot of webinars. We did a lot of things. We finished another documentary film. We really started to foray into the evil world of anti-social media, right? The FANG companies, Facebook and Alphabet and Netflix, Apple, Google, all that. We'll talk about that for sure. Big tech is sort of the new big media. So that'll probably come up here in a little bit this evening. But that book actually talks about the long 50-year backslide to where we now are. We didn't just wake up in some fake news moral panic conundrum the other day. This has been happening it's been happening since the end of World War II in a lot of ways. I mean, we can go back. I'm an historian by day, so sometimes I can just keep going that way, but I'll try to keep things to the mid-20th century to the present. But in that book anyway, and Ralph Nader was kind enough to write a foreword for us, he talked about how we got here with the embrace of neoliberalism, the rise of the corporate and professional managerial class, not only taking over the economy, but our public institutions, whether it be government, colleges, education, healthcare. It's sort of this Ayn Rand wet dream that's kind of came in and taken over, and it's privatized, and it's sold to people as like, well, you can get yours, and it's all up to you. Until you realize that you might not be able to get yours, and then somehow it's your fault, right? And we live in a culture that has obviously, in many, many ways, socialized a lot of our challenges and problems, and then the corporations have kind of privatized the profits and taken those away. Well, that's impacted media, right? And so getting sort of how we got to our current crisis, all of these things have impacted our institutions, and the Fourth Estate is no different. It's not exempt from these things because, in particular, we have a press that is mostly private. We have a for-profit system, right? And the idea back in the day was, well, that's how you'll keep it vigorous and independent. And that's how people will compete for the scoops. And that's how no one's beholden to any one, given force or entity. Well, that proved to be nonsense as corporations got larger and they were vying for corporate personhood as early as 1886 in California with the railways, and of course that finally came to pass in 2010. It was a long time coming and several court rulings and so forth later, but corporations eventually did get what they wanted. And it wasn't just Republicans helping them get there, it was both major parties that have also been subsumed and controlled by hedge funds, major banks, corporations, the military-industrial complex, big pharma, big ag. We can go down the list. But there's also big media and big tech. We've come a long way to get to a not great place. 50 years ago, we used to have 50 corporations or so that controlled much of the media. We're down to a half a dozen. When we heard about the Wild West of the internet and all the promise that was coming with it with the Democrats and Bill Clinton, well, that was short-lived too. And the information highway started to have a really steep on-ramp that only certain people could access. And the Telecom Act of 1996, which is only the second major telecom act in our whole history. The first is 1934 telecom, which was for radio, basically to divvy up frequencies so people didn't step on each other, right? It was supposedly to help promote diversity, believe it or not. And it was supposed to make it so that you couldn't have monopolization. And there were rules about who could run it and own it and how many, and you had to leave room for others. It certainly wasn't perfect, but there was certainly a sense of community behind some of the 1934 Telecom Act. 1996, the community is basically squeezed out of it. It's basically a free-for-all for just saying how many corporations could own how much of a percentage in what community. Basically that and the disappearance of the fairness doctrine in 1987 under Ronald Reagan, which was around since 1949, is the other nail in the coffin. So we've had signposts, we've had warnings, we've had these things coming a long way, and I think it's really instrumental and instructive to have a sort of a history of this and a context of this. Because many people in our country kind of woke up after the 2016 election and they acted like, oh my gosh, everything has gone to hell in a handbasket overnight. How did we get here? As if, again, there was plenty of hagiography afoot and the bemoaning of, oh, if we could only have Obama again and Joe Biden. Well, people seem to forget that media consolidation and big tech giveaways were all the order of the day under Obama and the Democrats. They love Silicon Valley and big tech, and they were handing things over to them left and right, willy-nilly. They also had a coup in Ukraine that we're still dealing with some of the repercussions of. We had a president under Obama who didn't want to go after any of the banks or Wells Fargo or anybody that was responsible for the mortgage crisis, sending people out onto the street. So, it gets a little tedious when everybody is obsessing with Orange Man bad, right? And again, Matt Taibbi was right to call it Trump derangement syndrome, which doesn't in any way negate criticisms of whatever Trumpism is or whatever the MAGA, I don't want to dignify it with the word philosophy too much, but whatever the thought processes or historical conditions that collectively have manifest themselves as a partially astroturf but not entirely disgruntled working class Rust Belt kind of movement that a grifter and a con man came along and breathed some life into, right? I grew up in the Rust Belt. I grew up in the shadows of the rusty steel mills in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I went to college in Youngstown. My grandpa lost his job on Black Monday in 1977 at Youngstown Sheet and Tube. At one point was the largest steel producer in the entire country. Youngstown was the global epicenter of what it meant to have industrial wealth and a working class that could afford homes, houses, cars, send their kids to school. I went to the college that those steel workers built and sent their kids to in Youngstown and created I was there long enough that labor died that they created a labor museum. And I don't say that as a good thing. And I'm a big fan of museums. I worked at the Butler Institute of Art in Youngstown for a long time, or not a long time, but in grad school. And it was the first all-American art museum in the country. It's an amazing institution. And I grew up there. There's amazing, wonderful, kind people there. They're also desperate, hurting, provincial, confused, and have been betrayed by both major parties over the last 2 generations. That's also true. So this doesn't mean that either of the major candidates in the major parties speak for those people. They may occasionally speak about or to curry favor or votes, but that's no different than what the corporate media has done. The corporate media in general, have also abandoned those areas of the country. They've abandoned those people. They've abandoned those interests. And in the process, they have sort of ceded that territory to make it ripe for more faux populist sentiments. And this is why, even in places now, like Pittsburgh, we're seeing a rise in sort of team red, team blue, but Pennsylvania is flirting with flipping red. We see Minnesota holding votes back from Biden in the primary, 20% of people saying they're uncommitted because they're opposed primarily to the policy in Israel and what's happening in Gaza, right? Well, again, even though the corporate media do a great job of not informing people about exactly what's going on, these people that supposedly live in the backwaters of the flyover states, they can smell that something's been terribly wrong for a long time. They know that the media doesn't serve their interests. They know that the major parties aren't serving their interests. And they kind of flip the coin and go back and forth every 4 to 8 years because, again, not only do many of these places lack critical media literacy education, they often lack civic literacy. Reading levels in this country are only at about a 5th to 6th grade level, and in some places they're even worse. So the crisis that we're facing in media, in many ways, is mirrored all over the place in our other institutions. And it's easy for people to choose sides, I suppose. It's easy to pick a team and stick with it. Because if you're Team Red, you can go to Fox News and you can go to Newsmax and you can go and find your sources that speak your truth to you, confirmation bias, right? But if you don't like that and you're Team Blue, then you've got your CNN and your MSNBC. And you've got the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Sorry, not them. That's Team Red. I'm sorry. That's the elite version of Team Red, though, right? A little different. Fox doesn't pander the same way as I would say the Wall Street Journal does to Team Red. But Team Blue is MSNBC, or as I call it, MSDNC, in a nutshell. The kind of elite derision of common people that comes through those forms of media is really a poor strategy as far as informing the public and mobilizing people to become more civically engaged. In fact, what it's done is it's more distracted people and turned them away. It's turned them away from these kinds of institutions. It's turned them away from a lot of the major media outlets. And again, we could argue, I could certainly argue that that's kind of a good thing because independent media, right? In independent media, there are so many rich sources of information that really report about what's happening in local communities. However, it's finding it, it's platforming it. This goes back to media literacy issues, right? People don't know some of these places exist, they don't know where to find them. Another one of the outcomes that's happened because of the corporate consolidation of media that's happened over the last 30, 40 years, is that we have news deserts. We now have hedge funds owning media outlets, laying everybody off, and then there are no local sources for news or information, which is why it's an honor to be on KSKQ with the Project Censored show. We air out of Berkeley, out of KPFA, the flagship Pacifica station. It just turned 75 years old on Monday. So happy birthday to KPFA. And we've been on air there for 14 years. I've been director of the project for that long. I've been with Project Censored for 15, 16 now. But again, not every community is a Berkeley that has these kind of outlets or these places where people can stumble across that kind of information, right? On the internet, we have the promise of it, but it's needle in the haystack problem. If you don't know what you're looking for, it's hard to find it. And then if you find something, it's hard for people to say, well, I don't know whom to trust. I don't know who to trust. A lot of folks, the reason that establishment media was so jacked about people listening to Joe Rogan wasn't because they had, certain people on there spewing misinformation or disinformation. It's because he gets 12 million people watching his program, and Fox, which has the highest ratings of the cable news, only gets about 3 million. Rogan blows all the corporate and broadcast media out of the water on a daily basis. Right? And again, that's not me endorsing Rogan as a journalist. He's not, right? It's me saying people do want information. They will watch somebody talk about in-depth issues for an hour or 3 if they're interested. And if somebody just doesn't throw softballs or toss BS lines one after another, or if they don't just constantly play gotcha journalism, right? Where they're just looking to undermine whoever's on with them, right? And so notice how we have many different things happening in many different ways in terms of their positivity or negativity. We have, on one hand, a crisis of legacy media and journalism in the Fourth Estate, but yet we have all this hope of independent press and media. And even though these tech platforms, right, what we call the FANG, F-A-A-N-G, which I think is, and it should have changed by now, but I think it was originally when the term was coined, it was Facebook, Alphabet, no, it wasn't Apple, it was Facebook, Apple, something else, Netflix, and Google was last. But as you know, the parent companies, Alphabet is Google, YouTube, Meta is Facebook, Instagram. You've heard lately in the news that there's a problem with TikTok, right? So can anybody here tell me what the problem with TikTok is that's different than any of the other things I just rattled off? It's not owned here. Yeah, it's owned by some other people in other countries, and other countries have, well, other country, China, not just any country, right? Has some dominion around it, right? And so, but all the complaints you're seeing in Congress about why TikTok is so bad apply to every other platform. I mean, these people are either too stupid or are busy being uber coy to try to pass it off that it's a problem, right? And they're right, it is a problem, but they're not right about what the problem is, because the problem is the same across all the platforms. And Siva Vaidnathan wrote about it a number of years ago when he took apart Facebook in a piece called, it's a book called Anti-Social Media, How Facebook Undermines Democracy. And I mean, he was focusing on Facebook, but it's all these platforms, right? And because of the algorithms, the bots, the shadow banning, and the ways that they work and feed your confirmation bias and separate people and sort of stoke and fan flames of division, that has led us to a place that is less conducive for dialogue, less conducive to understand each other's opinions, less conducive to hear other views or opinions, because you get frustrated enough, you just tune it out. You're like, everything automatically is just, that's just the Fox noise machine. It's all nonsense. Or, that's just the liberal. Oh, look at Rachel Maddow going again after Russiagate. She has nothing better to do. And then people just sort of write it off. And you know, interestingly, while there's some truth in these kinds of criticisms on one level, we know Fox and Dominion voting, look, and this is a problem because there are problems with our voting system. There are problems outsourcing it to third-party software companies. There are problems with 3 companies running what should be public electorate, right? A public voting mechanism. But at the same time, Fox doesn't always report falsely. They don't always report nonsense. The flip side of it is over at places like CNN or what have you, they also can report decently and accurately on occasion, and then they can turn around and have the Cuomo brothers go at it and have a propaganda fest, right? Or NPR, most recently with Uri Berliner, right? After 25 years, he said, look, NPR is losing its listener base, not because people don't want to hear it, want news and information. It's because they've skewed and gone further more into a liberal identitarian programming. That's what NPR has been doing for years. They increasingly, by the way, get more corporate money than money from, quote, listeners like you. And so they're not really public community media the way KSKQ is, the way KPFA or Pacifica are. They are not, right? They are charlatans of the highest magnitude when they speak that way. And I know KQED down in San Francisco, a big outlet, when I run across folks from there, because I chair journalism at my school, we invite them over, and the students, we invite a lot of people so the students have access to various forms of media and networking and so on. But we don't just roll out the carpet and say, oh, you're doing a great job. I ask pointed questions to them, right? Like why I'm hearing on NPR on a forum program, why I'm hearing only establishment legacy corporate media people talk about media coverage of the 2024 election. If it's public media, why aren't they talking to independent reporters and public outlets, right? I mean, this was just 2 weeks ago on the way to class. I mean, this stuff is so ubiquitous. I can just turn the radio on the way over here or whatever. I can just pick at random and find examples of this kind of stuff happening on the regular. And this is why people are turning channels. This is why people are turning things off. It's not because people don't want to know things. It's because they're tired of being put in the middle of the team red, team blue fake news political theater, right? That just plays out day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, year after year now we've been doing this, right? And people are tired of it, right? And so it's understandable. But one thing that can happen when people get tired of things is instead of being skeptical, they become cynical, right? And that's not healthy. When more and more people in society become more cynical, they don't believe that things can change, and they don't believe that things can get better. And when we have independent media outlets that do report what's happening, and they do report, whether it's muckraker style about the conflicts of interest in the halls of power and in chambers of commerce and the business community and the political class, or whether it's just trying to let the community know about public health issues, right, in a way that's nonpartisan. When in the world, well, don't answer that because I know the answer, but when in the world did things like public health become a massive political conspiracy and controversy, right? To where we can't even talk about what's basically decent and okay and good for each other, right? When you start to look at those kind of things, you really start to discover that many of the challenges and problems we face, which are myriad, they do have a connection to the collapse of a public press. They do have a connection to how we inform ourselves, how we communicate with each other, and the media has a big role to play in it. Now we, as people who either are being the media or consuming the media or whatever, we have responsibilities too. We can't just push the button and let the truth beam into us. Right? We actually have to think critically. We have to go out and do due diligence. We have to sometimes admit we don't know something, or gasp, admit we were wrong about something, right? And again, this is another thing. Between the political class and the Fourth Estate, neither of these institutions seem to have anybody that's humanly capable of admitting any error anymore. If I'm not mistaken, and I could be, but if I'm not mistaken, the last time that I remember a president giving what appeared to be a bona fide apology for completely misleading the public, and this is crazy, I think it was Ronald Reagan. I think it was. And when Reagan was talking about how we were not trading arms for hostages and there was no chicanery with the CIA and the drug wars and these kind of things, it was entirely plausible that he didn't know about these things at the time, right? He was likely kept in the dark about many of them, just like the October surprise and other things that George Herbert Walker Bush was involved in at the time. But once the Iran-Contra stuff started to hit the fan, by the way, guess who broke that story? Independent media, Bob Perry, Consortium News, right? The independent press, not the corporate media, right? And by the way, nowadays, Joe Lauria and Consortium News, they're constantly under attack. They're shadow banned by Google. They've been demonetized in part by PayPal on occasion, or YouTube. These are the new forms of digital censorship, right? But that's the outlet that we're seeing now that gets just thrown under the bus, right? Because they routinely speak out in favor of people like Julian Assange and organizations like WikiLeaks, and they promote protection of whistleblowers, right? Well, that's a no-no in the legacy press unless they get to vet them and they know who they are and yada yada. But whenever you have whistleblowers embarrassing the legacy press for their lack of coverage, they don't like that. They don't take it lying down. But back to our friend Ronnie Reagan. I don't get to say that often. So Reagan, months after that he had made this gaffe of sorts, and he was routine for those, but he said, my instincts told me that we were not doing those things, but the facts said otherwise. Huh. Wow, that's remarkable. Just looking back into the recent past, there was a lot of opportunities for public officials to say, gee whiz, I got that wrong, Doc Fauci. Gee whiz, I was wrong about the fact that we were spying on people and demonetizing people and kicking people off the internet. Biden could have talked about that. That's one of the stories in our top censored stories this year. But they were not just covert about it. They went totally public with the Disinformation Governance Board. They actually tried to create a public entity that would police the internet and police information. Of course, it happened for about a month. They got shot down from the left and the right, saying like government doesn't have any business in this ascertaining of what's true or false, right? And so the disinfo mini-true, as Orwell would call it, didn't disappear, just went back to the NSA and the CIA where it's always been, right? But they had such hubris because of COVID and the fake news tropes and Trump. They had such hubris that they thought they could publicly get away with calling for censorship. They're still doing it. They're still openly calling to censor media outlets, censor big tech platforms, social media platforms, in the name of policing mis and disinformation, right? And in fact, media literacy has now been weaponized as a buzz phrase by these same neoliberal folks. NATO has their own media literacy program now, right? Guess who else is in the media literacy fact-checking game? The PR wing of NATO, the Atlantic Council, right? Those people sit at jobs at Meta and Facebook, and they sit on fact-checking teams when stories about the Ukraine and Russia and other things come along. These are not nonpartisan groups. These are not unbiased groups. These are not objective people or sources at all. Yet, they're the Trojan horse fighting fake news for you, so you don't have to think for yourself. Anytime you go one or two steps into these programs that are allegedly good for you, you'll discover there's something they have in common. They all want to think for you. They all want to save you the trouble and save you the time. And as they're doing it, they're gradually positing different versions of their realities that they want you to parrot, they want you to frame the rest of your worldview through, right? This is very insidious because if you are not a critically media literate person, if you are not a civically literate person, if you do not read and study and do these things either for yourself or have gone, even schools have serious pedagogical problems with curriculum and so forth. But notice how in the past several years, even things like do your own research has turned into an insult, right? Oh, Joey was doing his own research on YouTube. Okay. How about doing your own research isn't the same when everybody does it, right? So when PhD people do their own research and only look at peer-reviewed journals and only look at things that are funded by corporations, are they thinking for themselves when they're doing their own research? Maybe not. But if they have those 3 magic letters after their name, they get a buy. They get a pass. Or it's peer-reviewed. Peer review is a great concept. It's also totally corruptible. And it's been corrupted. In fact, the editor of The Lancet almost a decade ago was one of our top 3 censored stories, went on record saying that half the stuff they published was not true. It was on the basis of who was getting funded and how it got passed through, and that there was a crisis in the journal structure and the crisis in the peer-reviewed system. It's since spread other places, right? So again, this epistemic crisis, right, has permeated all of our institutions. It's permeated education, right? And you have then people vying, and this goes back at least, we can go back to Plato and the Philosopher King, but we won't. You go back at least 100 years, the people that were responsible for selling the American public World War I, the Great War, Eddie Bernays, George Creel, the Creel Committee, and the Wilson administration, those people wrote the blueprint for how to manage information in large industrial, quote, democracies. So you could present information that was approved and seemed reasonable. You could allow some debate within some sort of myopic center area, little right, little left, not too much. Capitalism being the underlying constant, right? So you never have anything too far left of liberalism in the New Deal. You know, Franklin Roosevelt wasn't lying when he said he saved capitalism in 8 days when he shut the banks down. He did it to rebuild faith in the economy and faith from the public into the banking system. And then he continued to rebuild a modern liberal capitalist state, right? And for a while in the 30s, their labor was important. It was an important component of that. But as soon as you get into Taft-Hartley, 48, and then in through the 50s and 60s, labor started to take it on the chin. It started to become more ideologically pigeonholed, that working people were right-wing or conservative, and kids that went to school were the more liberal-minded people. You know, that kind of shit started, that kind of stuff started in the 50s and 60s. And then it gets off leash. You know, the hard hats and myths of people spitting at veterans and all that jazz, kids getting shot at Kent State, not a myth, right? That just went on steroids through the 80s, through the 90s. A lot of people went to sleep during these different periods. In fact, Haynes Johnson has one of the great historiographies of Ronald Reagan called Sleepwalking Through History that talks about these pivots and these things that were happening right in front of us. And I'm old. I was born in 1970, so I was a teen in the Reagan years, so that's kind of when I started paying a lot of attention to what was going on. And given that I had known that things had happened to my family with the mills closing and all these things happening, I started noticing things changing. I started noticing them getting bad, really bad. And I started noticing people stop talking about politics, and they stopped talking about those things. And they kind of just turned inward. And whole regions of the country kind of did these things, where they felt like they were just the land that time forgot, right? And then every 4 years, Team Red or Team Blue comes and rings their bell, right? And says, what's going on over here? Well, that sucks, we better help you out. And then off to the election they go, and 4 more years of doing nothing for these people. Well, how long are we going to ping pong back and forth and do that, right? Because from Herbert Walker, Bush, and Perot, and Clinton, so from Clinton to then Bush to, well, Obama, and Obama is just a slicker version of the identity politic version of the neoliberal Clinton regime, right? With Biden, right, the senator from was it MasterCard? It was the other one, the bank. Yeah, it's in Delaware, but people used to joke that he was the senator from, it wasn't MasterCard, it was the senator from MBNA, but it's Delaware, right, is right. Right. So, but nevertheless, I mean, these are the people that we see in office, and the way the media tend to cover it is that you're supposed to somehow believe that Obama or Biden or Clinton or Kamala Harris or whatever, they're all somehow the second coming of Eugene Debs and Mother Jones. You know, and the other side of the coin, you know, we're supposed to believe that like hack con men, you know, and failed business people born on third base thinking they hit a triple are somehow ideological equivalents of Barry Goldwater, right? Or Eisenhower, right? And they have the ability to understand people and communicate and bring people together, right? Again, that's all a fairy tale, a bad one, a dystopian fairy tale at that. But where does media come into this then? Let's get back to this issue of media, and instead of talking about the problems, because I said I'd stop after a minute, instead of talking and focusing on a lot of the challenges we face, what are some things that are going on that are addressing all of this stuff? All of the things that we've been talking about. Well, you're not going to be surprised to hear me say that education is a major area where we can make a difference, but education has been under attack for a very long time. Teachers, oh my. I mean, talk about people who have been put through the veritable ringer, especially in the past 5 years. It's absolutely brutal what's happened to teachers, especially young teachers. And what's happened as a result is that it has really negatively impacted not just education as an institution, but it's affected children, it's affected families, and it's affected communities. And when we have people no longer trusting these center areas where we thought we were safe, right? We thought we could send our kids and they wouldn't get shot up or they wouldn't get indoctrinated, right? We have all kind of fears around these public institutions, right? The antidote to that is reclaiming them from their neoliberal overlords and actually having people that teach in the classroom a critical pedagogy that does not teach to a test and does not outsource the critical thinking process. It builds confidence in people to think for themselves, and it teaches people the importance of citizen journalism and being involved in their community, reporting on things that happen, and creating solutions. It's always worked that way. We somehow think because we have gadgets and, you know, all these things on the screen and we can do amazing things, right? You've all seen that picture, I'm sure, from the 80s of some person that has like 600 technological gadgets on a table in a room, filling them all, and they're like, oh, this stuff is now in your pocket. Is that really a good thing? I mean, sure. You know, when I was a kid, I always wanted Spock's tricorder, you know, or something like that on Star Trek. I always thought the communicator was really cool. I thought the phaser was cool too, but we don't need more weapons. But, you know, communication is important. Having information and data at your fingertips, I was like, wow, that's amazing. Well, now we have it, But we don't have some Roddenberry utopia. We have quite the opposite. What we have is we have people that have at their fingertips whatever they think they want to look for, and it shows up and reinforces whatever they thought they wanted without any critical assessment whatsoever. Because they're not being taught how they're being used by devices and platforms, media literacy, and they're not taught about how the companies that own them purposely designed them like casinos to make people addicted for dopamine hits. No joke. All these platforms are designed in the same way that they designed slot machines and casino maps. You all know the joke about going into a casino and not finding your way out, right? Yeah, no kidding, that happened to me last year. And I don't gamble and I don't really go to casinos, but I was in Reno for a business trip, and walking around one evening, and one of the whole blocks is like a casino or whatever. Made the mistake of walking in one way and went around the corner and in. It was like 30 minutes went by, man, and I couldn't get out. It was like 11 o'clock at night. I'm like, why, dude? Yeah, there you go, dude. Walmart, Target, they're all the same way. That's right, by design. And of course, the thing you want that you're only in there for 5 minutes is all the way in the back corner of the store. And so you got to walk through everything else on your way out and blow money on things you didn't need anyway. But I did finally find my way out. But I actually had to ask a security guard who let me out a back door in a parking garage. It's as if he didn't want to be seen taking me to the main entrance, if there was one. I kept wondering if it just disappeared when I walked through it. But these challenges we're facing are by design. So the solutions have to be deliberate. They can't be just happenstance. They can't be scattershot, and they can't just be a one-off. We have to have systemic means by which to rebuild community journalism. Victor Pickard at the University of Pennsylvania talks about this all the time, that for even $5 or $6 billion, we could really start to create more independent public media outlets. He and Craig Aaron over at Free Press think that it takes more like 30 billion in order for us to really create some kind of a public media, journalistic infrastructure. And before you say, oh my God, $30 billion, like, oh my God, that's so much money. How much did we just spend on the Pentagon last year?
48% of our entire
Yeah.
budget went to the Defense Department.
If you want a figure, the percentage is there. If you want the figure with inclusion of intel agencies, interest on past wars, because we pay for that. That's what happens when you put war on the credit card. Over $1 trillion annually. Mm-hmm. So $30 billion is a lot of money for us, but not for them. It's an inconsequential amount, in fact, and they won't let us have it. They won't give it to us. Because if we had a public interest media system, if we had a KSKQ times 20 in a town like this, and in every town, the news and information ecosystem would be different. And it's not just, by the way, the owners who cede to the shareholders and advertisers, but it is also even in the profession of journalism itself, that many journalists have become corrupted, or they have become soft on ethical principles because jobs are hard to come by, right? We know, I mentioned Yuri Berliner earlier at NPR, who said, hey, look, these folks got all kinds of stories wrong, and that's why the public doesn't trust us anymore, is we won't give credence to the public's concerns, and we're supposed to be a public voice. The CEO at NPR doubled down, suspended him for a week without pay, said he was full of it, and now the guy resigned. He was there for 25 years. He was one of the best voices they had. And simply because he went public and said, look, I'll tell you why we're not getting a lot of new people and a lot of new listeners. It's because we're not doing it public interest journalism anymore. We're picking sides. And that's okay if you pick a side, but don't pretend that you're not picking a side, Fox Fair and Balanced. CNN, the most trusted name in news, even though they poll dead last. This is part of the challenge, right? is that, and by the way, this doesn't mean that independent journalists aren't biased. This doesn't mean the community media gets it right every time. But it does imply this. Those outlets that have their pulse on the community and reporters that come from the community, they have a stake, not just in the reporting, not just in what they're doing at their job. They have a stake in the outcome of the stories they tell and the voices they platform, and they can make a difference. They can make a positive difference, or they can make other differences. And they do all the time. So what we do at Project Censored is we promote media literacy education. We promote an independent press. We tell people, of course, be aware of corporate media and legacy media, but watch out for junk food news, sensational tripe that's everywhere, right? Even if you don't care about Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, you know they were at Coachella, you know what hat he had on, you know, even if you don't need to know or don't want to know, you can't escape it, right? You can't escape it, right? And look, guilty pleasures aside, that's not to suggest that people can't enjoy this thing or enjoy a story or some entertainment. But when the news becomes infotainment, and when the news is no longer just information for the community and it has to compete for eyeballs for advertisers and go more and more down the yellow journalism rabbit hole for sensationalist tabloidized stories. And look, they've tabloidized the entire country. Donald Trump is in court over what should be a National Enquirer story. I mean, the thing just wrote itself, and the media won't let it go. It's the media that keeps breathing life into that Frankenstein's monster that they created. And if they would let it fizzle out and let the courts do their thing, we wouldn't know he was falling asleep in court the other day. And we wouldn't care. But this is where we are. Our news and our elections both turn so rarely on significant substantive issues that we've really let our expectations go down and down. Wait a minute, we are now starting to go more from the skeptical to the cynical. We are now going more from the, wait, I think we can change this, or there's something we can do about this, to, really, again? Really, it's these two candidates, octogenarian candidates, again? And Hillary Clinton just had her deplorable moment, right? They just wheeled her back out, right, to prop up Biden's kind of not so great polling figures. And she went on the late night TV. Why did she go on late night TV? Well, they figured that's where the younger folks are. Maybe not young folks anymore, but youngish folks, maybe millennial generation, Gen X, et cetera. People that certainly could be voting in large numbers. And she went on and he said, again, he's not a journalist, but he asked a real question. He said, what do you make of the fact that the public seems very dissatisfied with the election? We see record numbers of people in the two major parties that do not want to vote for Trump or Biden. And they are curious and wondering why there aren't more. Why aren't there other people? And here's Jimmy Fallon. I'm like, my God, Jimmy, you're not, you're asking a question. I know it's probably an accident, but it's a good question. And she said, those people need to get over themselves because these are the candidates. One of the candidates is an old, bitter person with 91 counts against them, and the other is the nicest guy you'd ever meet that's the best president we'll have. And you're just sitting there and you're just like, what reality are you living in? I know the reality they're living in at the Hamptons. I know that reality. I mean, I don't know it well, but I do know it prevents them from caring about anybody outside of there, right? The Democrats are this far from the next deplorable moment, handing things over to who knows whom with no qualifications that are any good for public service, all because they stubbornly are clinging to, well, the dying neoliberal control of the global order. And in many cases, this is what COVID control was about. And I know that's not a popular thing to discuss because there's wacky ideas on many sides. But between all that, there's some truth. It's actually not popular to say, but locking things down for that long had negative consequences, especially for young people. Even if it was done under good intentions, which I don't always believe, it has negative outcomes. Why do we pretend that those outcomes aren't real? Why can't we ever talk about resolving a situation without crucifying whomever is to blame first? Well, that's the media. The media has to have its gotcha moment. They got to have the reason that they own your eyeballs long enough to sell it to the advertisers. Social media works the same way. It's the same way. And so this is why at Project Censored we highlight the independent news stories. And by the way, we're just doing the next book right now, Andy Lee Roth and I. We had almost 200 students this year on about 10 campuses across the U.S. that researched a couple hundred stories, and we've got a ballot of about 70 stories that we're looking at, and our 20-some judges are looking at them now, and they rank and look at them, right, and see. But we think they're all important stories that you're not hearing from the corporate or legacy media. But we're not just sitting in a room picking them like the Democrats say they can pick candidates behind closed doors smoking cigars, right, like Tammany Hall. They said that out loud in a court case after the 2016 election when they admitted to rigging the primary. Anyway, it's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. Anyway, yeah, I mean, it's just, how can you even say anyway to that? It's like, that should be a show-stopping moment, right? That should have got everybody into the streets saying, like, what did you just say? Like, what is going on? But it's not, right? And this is why we have these same people. This is why we have these same candidates, is because people have become cynical enough they don't believe that they can change and they can make a difference. And I'm telling you, we can, because I see young people doing it every day. I have a privilege to teach young people. I have a privilege to be around these people. They have a lot to look forward to, and they have a lot of hurdles that have been thrown in front of them. And they have great energy and creativity, but they need our help. They need help of older people to listen and to help guide and teach, not boss and admonish, but guide and listen and go along and be part and bring them into the fold like mentors are supposed to do, right? We know this. We know how to do this. Human beings have been doing this for an awfully long time. So among the other things that we do with the project, working with these young people, we do the public radio show. We do dispatches on media and politics every couple of weeks where we have critical media literacy analysis of politics in the media to show people why media criticism is an important part of journalism. One of the things that our media don't do is criticize itself. They're real quick to throw everybody else under the bus. Right? CNN's a liar, Fox is a liar, you're a liar, everyone's a liar. There's cynicism. Press criticism is a very important part of our civic culture. George Seldes, right? I.F. Stone, some of the early media critical journals that came out of the mid-20th century. In many ways, Project Censored has continued those types of traditions because we want to lead by example. We want to show people that education does make a difference. Being media literate does make a difference. Calling out and showing how media don't always live up to the Society of Professional Journalists ethical standards is significant. Showing people, like they just did recently at The Intercept, which has a history of its own challenges and problems, but they just got done at doing a huge expose on the New York Times leaked memo about how the New York Times had policies that don't allow reporters to even say words like occupied territory or genocide or even Palestine. This is the paper that claims to be the paper of record, the objective source of information. And they got caught twice in the last 6 months pounding the hell out of the bogus 40 beheaded baby story that Biden repeated over and over, and the other about the Hamas rapes, where they even hired outside people to manufacture the story. And then they doubled down on it. They said, well, we can't really get to the bottom of it. Right. Because the bottom of it is all the way into the basement, right? Where you've buried all the other files on your COINTELPRO crap, your Judy Miller and Jason Blair nonsense, and your WMD files, right? The problem with fake news isn't that it's just being projected by evil practitioners on the internet or troll farms out of Macedonia. It's being peddled by the legacy news outlets while they're telling you that they're not doing it. And if you don't have media critics that will stand up and point that out fairly, meaning wherever they see it, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Fox, MSNBC, us at Project Censored. If we make a mistake, we correct it. If someone challenges a perspective, we debate it. We don't shut people up. We don't silence people. Censorship is not the antidote to these challenges. Dialogue is. Empathetic listening is. Looking at independent journalism in the public interest is. Right? And so at the project, that's what we try to promote. That's what we try to show by example. We have a chapter in the book every year called Media Democracy in Action that highlights people and organizations that are doing this kind of work, that are really working to make a difference, such that you can read about them and you're like, oh my gosh, look at that. That's something that we could do in our own community. Or we could start a club at the local school. Look, I mean, again, because many of us think, well, we can't go big and we can't solve it all at once. And so we get frustrated and we forget. We forget, how long did people struggle for women to be, to have the right to vote?
They suffraged for a long time.
Yeah, they suffraged without for a long time. And even then, women couldn't even open their own bank accounts till the 70s without their husband or dad's. I mean, come on. We still live with the legacy of Jim Crow in cyberspace. We still live with the legacy of patriarchy and sexism. But now we have far-right forces that tell us we're not even allowed to talk about that anymore. And then we have, I hate to say it, an opportunistic and stupid litmus testing left that likes to get caught up in it all, where it just focuses on these issues. And as someone that's a social scientist that's been teaching intersectionality and learning about it since Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term in 1989, it's about race, class, gender. It's about deconstructing power. It's not just about race. It's not just about gender or trans or whatever flavor you are. It's about class.
Working class.
It's about class. And because class is about access. Class is about opportunity, right? And the focus on, well, a lot of people of color don't have the opportunities. Right, because racism. But not just the racism. Bell Hooks wrote about this for years. The late, great Bell Hooks, the social theorist and feminist. And they wrote repeatedly. In fact, one of the best books I think that they wrote was a book called Where We Stand, Class Matters. It was such an eye-opening book for me that she laid it out so clearly that her own struggles in life weren't just about being a black female, weren't just about other identifications. They factored in for sure. But the one area that had to be addressed was class privilege. We have a media system that never talks about class because they're in the upper class. We have a political system that doesn't talk about class because they are the upper class. Corporate media don't just work with the upper class, they are the ruling class. The same people that sit on the boards of directors of those companies sit on the same boards at Raytheon or Boeing or Lockheed or fill in the blank, Amazon, Kroger, Pfizer.
Congress.
Well, those are the same people. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, Wes, because in the 2023 book, our top story was fossil fuel industry subsidized at a rate of $11 million per minute. It's up to 13 million now. 13 million a minute. Money's flying out the door right now. Notice how it's not coming in here to us. Hey, wait a minute though. It's not just a story on the list. you can go through the stories and connect the dots. Guess what story 4 is? At least 128 members of Congress invested in the fossil fuel industry. I wonder how they got subsidized. We do that in every book. We do it every week on the show. We do it in classrooms. We do it at the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library. We do it wherever people want to talk about it. So let's get to that part of the evening. I know you close at 9. I'm happy to stay until I'm kicked out. I told you before, brevity wasn't a strong suit of mine. But there's a lot of things to talk about, you know, and there's a lot of things, of course, that I did not say or did not get into or briefly passed over that we might, you know, get into. But I'd like to spend the rest of the time hearing from you and letting that guide the rest of our dialogue and conversation. So thanks so much for coming out, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I saw a shocking article today in one of my feeds. I didn't know anything about it, and it seems like we need to know about it. It's about Elon Musk and everybody else piling on now to get rid of the National Labor Relations Board, and then after that, get rid of every other board.
Right, the deconstruction of the labor apparatus that was erected through the New Deal and the Great Society program, they've been trying to dismantle it ever since. Gingrich really put some nails in the coffin.
Well, I knew they've been trying, but with the court we have, this sounds like more than trying.
Oh, no, they're well past trying. They're succeeding.
The NLRB is not very good for workers' rights. The NLRB has very little power. They really do very little for working people, and that isn't new. It's been that way a hell of a long time.
Yeah.
And it's getting worse.
Are we better off without them?
What's that?
Are we better off without them?
No, we're better with unions and people.
No, of course I know that, but I'm saying, if they get rid of the NLRB, are we better off?
No.
Doesn't it matter? Let's get to this. I think what you're talking about is regulatory capture. It matters who's on these boards, right? It matters who it is.
Absolutely.
So the FCC. Let's take the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. Even under the Democrats, we tend to have corporate media representation on the FCC. So by the way, right now, we're actually part of a challenge to an FCC case. Sue Wilson and an attorney in Baltimore brought a complaint against Sinclair Broadcasting a number of years ago because they have somehow managed to curry favor with the FCC to be permitted to own a larger share than legally permissible in a given market. And the only places that there are means by which to challenge such things if you're at all aware of them. But since the corporate media don't really tell you a lot about that, it's hard to find out. Sinclair certainly isn't telling us, right? So anyway, they put forward a petition that the FCC then needed to hear because it's every 7 or 8 years. They basically rubber stamp the license and the station gets to keep doing whatever they want. Well, Sinclair was particularly egregious a few years back when they had everybody at all their stations reading from the top down exactly the same script, exactly the same thing, right? It was really Orwellian. Anyway, that case sat around for a few years and nothing happened, and the person that petitioned it passed away. And so they reached out to us and said, look, we know anybody in the area, and fortunately we do. We know a couple people, actually. There's a really great person that works at the Real News Network, and of course, none other than the co-host of the Project Censored show lives there. And so she went forward and said she'd add her name to the petition, and they could kick it back up and do it. And wouldn't you know, that of course, immediately Sinclair is trying to deny the replacement of the original petitioner who died, to kick it out to the trash. But a day after we published Sue Wilson's op-ed, all kinds of email, all kinds of flirt. All of a sudden, there was life in the case. Sinclair, all of a sudden. So you know what? You know someone's watching it. They're just watching, right? And they have their Google alert. Anybody that challenges us, come along. And some sleepy lawyer character was hanging out, and all of a sudden, ding, ding. Hey, this case from a few years ago is coming active. What's going on? And they immediately went into overdrive to challenge the new petition. They immediately, because they were just thinking it's going to go away. They just wait it out until someone dies or you quit. By the way, the lawyer that's doing this is doing it for free. These corporate lawyers shot all money all day long. Millions and millions of dollars. We have goodwill, we have information, we have heart, we have a conscience. We have a lot of things that don't add up to a lot of money. But we also have the truth. We have facts that show that these commissions are in fact not operating on their own charters and they're not operating in the public interest. NLRB, same deal. Nader's crowed about this for years, the problem of regulatory capture, the corporate capture of the commons, so that we have the edifices of these things that are supposed to watchdog, but they in fact are more like foxes at the henhouse, right? They are not doing what they claim to be doing, and they are in fact protecting the industries they're supposed to regulate. We see the same thing with the railways, 1,000 derailments a year with a Civil War era braking system. That the Democratic President Joe Biden interfered in the railway strike, interfered to prevent them from striking over partially safety issues, and then didn't even bother to show up in East Palestine for 2 weeks after it derailed. The people there, my colleague Max Alvarez from Baltimore at the Real News Network recently was there. They just did some great exposés. They're doing great coverage of East Palestine. We just covered it again on the Project Censored show. There are people covering these working class and these important stories and these environmental stories and these regulatory capture stories, but you're not going to see them in the corporate media, right? That's why it's important to be media literate, to be able to follow these, and then to also be civically illiterate, that you understand what corporate capture is. You understand what regulatory capture is. You look for it. You don't just look for the seal of approval from the FCC. You go and find out who exactly is on the FCC and where did they come from. I don't mean what town were they born in. I meant what board of executives were they just serving on. What's their class status?
He sold out the main demand that they could get the time off they needed to do with their health needs,
yeah,
and not have forced overtime.
He sold them all down there. And look, this is the Democrats selling labor down the river. There is no other party helping them. I mean, you got Peace and Freedom and Green. I know the third party routine. But you don't have any major players really speaking up for working class issues, and that's really a part of the problem. And this is again why people lose faith in government. See, the FCC is not regulating that. Look at that. Or see, the NLRB is not. Oh, the Environmental Protection Agency isn't regulating that. They're not doing that. They're corrupt. Now we're back to cynicism. Again, a lot of this kind of stuff works by design because when people are cynical and lose hope, they don't engage. And if you're not engaged, you can't change things. You can't help. You can't be informed. You can't support each other.
So there's a common thread that I'm seeing and hearing in all this, and you mentioned it a little bit, also in the historical aspect of corporations getting personhood.
Right.
Maybe you know this. Has there been any efforts at all to rescind corporate personhood?
It's not going to happen.
Have you seen the Supreme Court these days?
Yeah, but that's what I'm getting at, is that's another area that's captured is the courts. You know, and the Fifth Circuit in particular has been an incubator for a lot of these corporatist legal philosophies that have been reimagined as, right, public policy, right? I think that in order to undo that work, you're going to have the cases over. You're going to have the McCutcheon case, the FEC case. You're going to have Citizens United. You're going to have those cases overturned. And on the current composition of the court, that's not going to happen. But that doesn't mean we don't call attention to this. It means that we have a lot of work to do with civic literacy in order for people to understand why things like the courts really matter, right? Because they can make decisions that seem to happen outside the ballot box, outside even the pretense of representation, and they're by decree, and they last for generations.
So nobody's ever really tried?
No, there's people
All these-
trying.
No, to rescind corporate personhood.
You have to do it legally.
Right, but I haven't heard of any major cases.
That's
of-
because they don't get anywhere.
Uh-huh.
Because they're kicked out before they get in.
I've taken a bunch of notes since you've been writing, you've been talking, I've been writing, but I put some asterisks next to a bunch of them that I've written down here.
Sure.
These are about good things, and I'd like to
Good.
talk about some good things,
Good.
local, statewide, national, and internationally. I got some asterisks here I'd like to talk about.
Good.
So let's talk about the city of Ashland for a minute. We happen to vote at a higher rate here in Ashland than anywhere in Jackson County, and in some issues anywhere in the state of Oregon, and that's not just once in a while, that's all the time. We have a city council here that people get involved in, excited. We watch community access TV.
Yeah.
And in fact, we participate in it. We go door to door and help elect people. I got a few more asterisks. Listen
Yeah,
to
you
Listen to
asterisk
this.
away.
Listen to this.
Ashland
We
is
have
unique and fortunate
KSKQ.
that you have
We
a
have
community.
KSKQ. We have the Grants Pass Courier. 152 years old. It's like an underground newspaper in a high school or a college. They call out the county commissioners about their conflicts of interest. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen.
Doing their job.
And the Grants Pass Courier covers Ashland and Medford, the entire Rogue Valley, not just Grants Pass. I got a few more.
Good. You're fortunate to have a local paper that does that.
Oh, we don't have a Medford Mail Tribune anymore. You know what
America
happened
is
to them?
a news desert from
They're
coast
gone.
to coast.
They took over the Ashland Daily Tidings, and then they are completely gone. But we have the Grants Pass Courier, but there's more. We have Access TV, I mentioned that. You know, we've done so much privatizing. We just lost our student health center at the university. We've lost our library. The privatizing is really, but here's some of the good stuff. My union, SEIU, Service Employees International Union, here in Oregon, started organizing home care workers. Now this is a field that is close to nursing homes. We're also working there too. This is some of the most hideous, horrible things in the country is what takes place with our elderly people. But let me tell you what organizing has done. We've raised the standards. Having a union in there as home care workers has now brought up standards that in fact is driving up the whole industry. We got a long ways to go, but I'm talking about good things. I'm very proud of my union and the work that it does. By the way, the people who do home care work, they don't get paid very much.
No,
They don't make much more. They don't. The other things we're doing.
No, I know. Yeah, wait. I know.
A couple other things that are really important. And in England, my daughter-in-law, she's a professor there. Her book is called, her latest is Erasing Palestine is the name of her book. She's a teacher. She gets attacked for her political views, just like media and home care workers. Now they get assassinated all the time. This is the worst assassinations in the world. But this is getting into the bad stuff again. I want to tell you more about the good stuff. There really is some good stuff going on. You know, here in the state of Oregon, we're moving forward. This isn't pie in the sky shit. To a single payer healthcare system. We have doctors and lawyers. We have legislation. We are working with some of the folks in your California Nurses Association. Some of these people. This is all good stuff.
Yes.
No, this is actually happening.
Yes.
This is really good stuff. So what I like is this. I like to get behind things that I can have some effect with. I know that here locally, that we can work and change things. Oh, we do it here in Ashland. We participate.
Yes.
So that's the main things I want to tell you about. When you talk about hedge funds and media, they run housing, they run our health care.
They do.
They do run our health care. But we're fighting back because we have we actually have doctors, lawyers, and healthcare people in the state of Oregon who are fighting back, and people are becoming educated about it. So these are things that excite me. My wife and I, she works on the international stuff with the Quakers, FCNL,
Yes.
Friends Committee National Legislation, Ending Endless War.
Yeah.
It is wonderful work, but it also is very, very depressing. Now, I like to work on stuff that's feels like I work with her on this
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
But I like to work on the local stuff and get my neighbor, hey, will you help us with this? Anyway, that's my 2 bits on it. And that's what we need to talk more about is the good
Solutions
stuff.
journalism.
What can we do? How can we make it happen?
Yeah.
My wife's been printed 5 times in this dang rag here.
Yeah.
You ought to see what they print. Like I told you, they take on the powers that be. This is like a high school underground
That's what they're
paper.
supposed to do. Over 100 years ago, the muckrakers like Lincoln Steffens and Upton Sinclair and Ida Tarbell, they took on the powerful, they took on the systems, and they made changes.
Well, we can do it.
We can and we are doing it, right? And what you just described is a litany of things that come about because of civic literacy, and they also come about because you still happen to have a voice in the community that reports on journalism in the public interest.
Didn't mention one other thing. That's back to the privatization. Do you know that we had for decades the Ashland Community Hospital, part of the charter of Ashland, of who we are? Want to guess what happened to it? Have you heard?
Got bought or sold or
Well, it
dismantled.
became Asante as a huge medical center
Yeah.
that's taken over our local little community hospital.
I don't know how I guessed that, Wes, even though I don't live here, but nevertheless.
And I'd like to piggyback on
Yeah,
something
go ahead.
Wes said here, because Jefferson Public Radio had,
That's our NTR.
Yeah.
we had our own fiber network with television,
Yeah.
and just in the past, well, that's been
Since
like 4
January.
months, since January, lost and all we have is Charter now, and, then now they're streaming, but
Oh.
the ISP JPR still exists, thank goodness. But this town of Ashland, back in 1998, created the Ashland Fiber Network. And it was really cool for a while there until streaming killed it, kind of like how the internet killed the
Yeah.
newspaper stuff. It just,
Yeah.
Did you know we own
flip
our
it.
own cable TV system here?
that's what he's, that's
But that's
For a short
that
period
is
of
a
time.
good thing. There are loads of places across the country that used to do all those things.
Yeah, it's gone.
Well, that's what we've been talking about in the last several books, and most of it has been driven by the tech sector. So that the people, the robber barons of old are no longer the steel and the coke producers. They're no longer these other characters. They're not just the same people that owned the newspapers in the local town. They're not even like the Hearsts, the Pulitzers, etc.
One
They're
more really
different.
good thing, Mickey, at the statewide level. We
I
can,
wasn't finished, but
we
go
can
ahead.
participate in our state legislature, and we do. What we do now, and COVID kind of brought this on, is so when we, instead of going to Salem, which is really hard if you live in Ashland to run up to a hearing, you can in fact sign up and you can give testimony and people do it. Over 400 people testified to try to keep Wall Street out of our doctors owning the doctor. This happened in Oregon.
This
So
is good.
These are good things I'm telling you about, and
I'm
they
aware.
excite me.
I see that you're excited, and I'm glad, and I wish that a lot of people were half as excited about them.
Well, I wish more would participate
Well,
and know about it.
but
That's the thing.
that's what I was talking about earlier when I kept talking about cynicism.
Mhm.
You have managed to stave off developing a cynical demeanor because you stay engaged and you work with people that feed into the positivity of how things change, and even if you fall down, you pick people back up and you regroup and you figure out what the next strategy or what the next thing is, right? And that's what unions historically were really good at. But notice that unions have been systematically under attack, dismantled, or co-opted over the last 50 years. It's the same way that we've talked about how the banks and the hedge funds have come in and bought everything. We've got the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab saying in that 2030 you'll own nothing and be happy. Well, that's the outsourcing of and ownership of everything, and then you're quit renting all of it. we'll all be sharecroppers on the digital plantation. And that's where things have been heading, right? That's where things are heading. But it is exactly the kind of local community activism and work that you're talking about, especially toward media. Because going back to the FCC, they're not all bought and sold characters from the corporate sector. People like Newton Minow that talked about TV as a vast wasteland that was being abused because it had so much potential, but it was going in the wrong direction. We had Nick Johnson, who said this is back in the 60s. He wrote a book called Your Second Priority when he got off the commission. It said, whatever your primary area of interest is, whether it's your labor, the community, whether, following city council, schools, education, rights, LGBTQ rights, whatever it is. If your second area of interest doesn't include media reform or media democracy and media literacy, you're likely to gain very little ground in whatever your primary area of interest is, because you will not be able to communicate with people. You will not be able to have that newspaper that you have there. Most communities in this country no longer have one of those. And if they do, it doesn't do what that one is doing, right? It's just selling people stuff. It's news that's getting bussed in from bots in some other city from a server. There's not even people reporting on the community, right? But again, the flip side, the positive, as you were accentuating, there are major movements. Like in New Jersey, there are multi-million-dollar grants and efforts afoot to rebuild public journalism. There are major efforts underway at various colleges and universities to strengthen journalism in the local community by having the student journalism programs or reporters not only report about what's happening on campus or what's happening with the football team or whatever, but what's happening on the board of trustees, what's happening in the community, what's the university or college footprint on the community, right? Are they doing good things? Are they lifting people up? Or are they causing more trouble and problems, right? I mean, you take a look at a lot of the towns that are so-called college university towns, the two major employers in a lot of these towns are the increasingly neoliberal private for-profit corporation and the healthcare system, right? And there are two models that have both been co-opted by privatization. And again, the philosophy that comes through there is the important thing, and this is, again, you're exemplifying the importance of civic literacy, is that these are now institutions that have different interests. They have different outcomes. They don't measure them the same way. They don't care if someone comes through in 4 years and learns something. They just need you to go into debt, they'll pass you through, right? And then you got to go out and get your job and start paying on your debt, right? And if you have a debt you got a mortgage on your head for 30 years, you're not going to be able to make decisions like going and rolling up your sleeves and working for the community or doing something because you're already 24 years old and you owe $100,000 on something. You aren't going to buy a house. You're not going to be able to get a car. You're going to probably have to move in with your parents or a family member if you're lucky enough, right? And that's what's going on with young people. That's what's going on with a lot of these people. And I tell you, it's not because they don't care. It's because that they've been dealt things that many of us haven't been dealt. Or when we were growing up and younger, we had different opportunities. And things have just changed. But again, you kept mentioning the positive, and I want to make sure that people are really aware of the fact that we do write about solutions journalism. It's not just Yes Magazine or Shareable or whatever. There are lots of people that are doing what's called solutions journalism, where they specifically look at challenges in given communities and they specifically give time and space and energy to who's doing something about it, right? And again, that usually invites a circular firing squad, right? If they're not doing it right, I can do it better, and that whole idiocy. But solutions journalism is a very important part of the process of figuring these things out, because it means people don't feel isolated. It means people don't just throw their hands up and say, well, nobody's doing anything about it, right? Or they don't just see like, well, it's you're the only guy that cares about this, right? And of course, you go out into the community and you work with other people, and then they eventually say like, well, you're not the only one. You're not the only one that cares. There's all kinds of people that care about it, right?
You mentioned railroads?
Yeah, I did.
You ever run into the Railroad Workers United? You know those guys?
I do.
I just want to bring them up because they've done a hell of a lot to keep us from going to a one-person ran train. That's been their issue, and I think we just got some news about that. They've been able to fight. They'll go back to it and still go
Yeah.
for it. But those
They've been
people,
fighting that for a while.
What's that?
They've been fighting this for a while.
Long time. But I bring them up as somebody good and the good things that are going on. And if you've never been to the Black Butte Center for Railroad Culture down there in Weed, California, there's a bunch of radicals down there running this thing.
That's cool. That's cool.
It really is
So
cool.
the Lever, David Serrata, who works at the Lever, they're the ones that reported a lot on the train derailments. They reported a lot on East Palestine. There are Steve Zeltzer, Work Week Radio. He did a lot of stuff for years. He's still very active in labor journalism. Right? Very, very important work.
Many years.
Yeah. Steve's still doing that really good work.
I heard from him. I didn't know if he was still alive.
He is
Steve
actually. He
still
just
is
did a
with-
thing with Max Alvarez and a bunch of people. They went to East Palestine, Ohio. They talked to people in the community who were impacted by it. And they're going around and talking to people that are suffering from adverse health effects. They're trying to look and see why nobody at Norfolk Southern cares about it, why nobody in Congress, why Biden isn't doing anything about it. That's what journalism in the public interest does. It goes to those places and it shines bright lights so that everyone can see, like, who's running and hiding, who's to be held accountable, but more importantly, how do we help the people that need the help the most? Not just pointing fingers and casting blame, but how do we actually make a difference? And journalism can do that. It can do that. Especially when it's done in an ethical way, in a community-based way, where the bottom line isn't profit. The bottom line is where the buck stops, not Truman style, but where accountability starts. And that's what journalism can do, is hold people accountable, right? And it could begin to demand that people do things about the challenges they face, and maybe mobilize local communities enough that if your local officials aren't doing enough about something, maybe you can replace them, right? I mean, gasp, right? In the country where incumbents have a higher rate of return than even the communists did in Soviet Union. But again, what's that about? That's about how our system is controlled. Our system isn't the same, right? But it has a remarkable control mechanism. The interesting thing about the Soviet Union and Pravda and their propaganda was most of the people in the Soviet Union knew they were being lied to. They knew they were being misled and suspected it, and they went and looked otherwise. The problem here, for years and years and years, was that people just thought that they were, I watched the news, I know what's going on, right? Or the CNN, read the New York Times, I know what's going on. You know what they want you to know what's going on, but you may not exactly know what's actually going on. And again, what we do at Project Censored is we try to remind people not to believe everything you think. You can change your mind, you can find new sources, you can broaden your horizon in terms of media sources and media places. That's what we try to tell people, because they say, where do we go to get information? There's no one place. We look at hundreds of sources over the course of a year. And again, I understand that's work, and I understand not everybody has time to do all these things, and that's another by design challenge, right? When you're busy trying to make ends meet, working 2 and 3 jobs because your union's collapsed, everything else is, the whole public infrastructure is collapsing, you don't have time to read and think, right?
Well, I've got time to read The Intercept every day. I read The Oregonian every day. I read, I used to listen to...
Most people, Wes, don't read at all.
Well,
And that's part of the challenge.
you gotta be around our house and listen to me and my wife talk about this stuff.
You should be aware that you have a very, very good thing going on. And it should be modeled, in my opinion. But not everybody has the access to that environment.
Everybody can get this paper for starters. It gets delivered.
Not everybody can. No, there's people in this community, I guarantee, that have never heard of that newspaper.
That's why I'm talking about it tonight.
Well,
How
I'm
many
glad.
people here subscribe in this room to Grants Pass Courier? Anybody besides me?
I did, and
Yeah,
I
so
traded
if you want
No,
to
that's
test my
my point
theory,
right
I'll
there.
go outside and find 10 people that
No,
never
the
heard
people
of
are
it.
in this room. I'm asking them to subscribe to this. This is
You can
well
ask.
worth it. It's the best newspaper
All
I've seen.
I'm saying
Stoddard
is
is
that
good.
you
Stoddard is good.
are coming from a position of someone that is civically and media literate and aware.
Well, I want the other people here to know they can get this puppy.
I think it's good, and I'm glad that
wanna
you're
see him
cheerleading
do
it.
it.
I'm glad I don't have any control over that.
I'll pay your first months for it. if
There
you'll
you
do
go.
it.
There you're sold.
I'm not kidding you.
But it's also not just subscribe to that newspaper. It's also support this Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library where you can come and have these conversations and you can talk about these things. Because guess what?
That's right.
There isn't one of these things in every community, and I can tell you that. This is a special thing.
Yeah, thank you for
It's
that.
a special thing that you have KSKQ. It's a special thing that you have people that can bring resources to the table to keep this kind of stuff going. And the reality is that it does cost money. What we do costs money. I do a lot of it because I teach, and as a public intellectual, I can do a lot of this work in the classroom, and I can turn this into the classroom and this into the classroom. And I, like you, try to get people to be aware of what's in their community and support it by subscribing. This is the thing that we can do, right? But it's important at the same time, don't take stuff like this for granted, because it's when people start to take it for granted. And we saw that in the last few years when things got really difficult for small local businesses, right? Target and Walmart were somehow immune to the COVID virus. Mom and pop stores, however, had to be shut down. You had to shut down the local businesses. But the big box stores could stay open, right?
Our local business stayed open.
That's good. But in many places across the country, they did not. And many small businesses did not make it through COVID.
Your contact.
And in the
I'll buy you
process,
first
when you
paper
have
for
those
Christmas.
places go out of business that have been there 30, 40, 50, 80 years, there's nothing left to take it over. And a Dollar General or a new super center or whatever is ready to come in. You got a mom and pop diner that goes out. McDonald's is ready to come to. We need another Starbucks, I'm sure, right? But again, that's all connected. It's all connected. The same thing that's happening to those places happens to media and happens in journalism. And that's why we can't take it for granted. So we shouldn't take that newspaper for granted, because you turn around and not enough people subscribe and not enough people support it, it'll go the
It's
way
been
of the
around
others.
154 years, and this
I can name you a ton of papers that have been around longer that are gone.
What's that now?
There's a bunch of papers that have been around longer that are now gone. That's all I'm telling
Well,
you.
that's the problem. Our Medford Tribune's gone.
I know this is a tangent, but it's something
Tangents are good.
that I feel is really, a parallel fractal to
Yeah,
this.
okay.
Because you're talking about, it's great that this paper is here, but how many people have access to it? And we, have this huge extensive library of lectures, but
a
people
great
might see
library.
they're not. I love this library, and I'm so grateful to be in Ashland, and I count my blessings every day, and I'm very, very grateful. What I'm gonna bring up though is actually something about social media
Yes.
that's come to my attention with both people I know who work for themselves or they're artists, festivals, businesses, losing the ability to use their social media account.
Yeah, that's
So,
bad.
One of the
For them.
projects that I am involved with as a festival that's, more than 10 years old, somehow they got disconnected from their account. So they haven't been able to post for months and months and months and months. Finally, it goes to a place where there's one legal team that can work with the meta team. They were saying it today, it's like $10,000 to get your account back in, a couple of weeks, or
Yeah,
you can
extortion.
do $5,000 for, it's total extortion. And so they're trying to now collect people to have a class action lawsuit
Yeah.
because it seems like a public commons, but you're still in this private domain. And so it would be, interesting to hear you speak to the crossover there, because it's not just the political arena, even people that aren't even doing anything like that. It could be, I know painters, I know other businesses, they're total hampered by having no platform.
209.
So
Yes.
we talk about this in the last several books. We've been talking about it for years. I taught a whole upper division course on this,
Thank you.
on moral economy and social media, or lack thereof. And we've actually written about a couple of cases too, and it's literally, you're kind of just going into the abyss when you're dealing with these tech companies, right? You can't even get a hold of people. It's very difficult to find somebody. And look, there's a lot of problems with social media. There's a lot of problems with the attention economy. But let's also look at some of the things that were positive, is that we were putting into the hands of people the means by which to elevate their voice and their concerns. And in some countries, that's the only thing they had at their disposal in order to spread revolution or to spread ideas and resistance. And so that's positive, right? But what we've discovered in most cases is that these are private companies, they're for profit, and all of what they do and how they work their algorithms, their platforms, their sites is proprietary, which means they don't have to tell you anything about it. And which means you can't prove you're being shadow banned, or you can't prove that you're being mistreated or treated unfairly. The onus is on you to show how you didn't follow their rules. Somehow they're dictating what your community standards are, right? So at YouTube, for example, Alphabet, Google, YouTube, they notoriously were, and it was so obvious that they were getting into some trouble, and but they've always won in court. And this is back to court, we're back to that. Because, for example, we discovered that that a lot of LGBTQIA plus content on YouTube was being shadow banned, suppressed, or demonetized. And so a lot of these, a couple of the channels that were taken down, there was one gay and lesbian channel that actually tried to contact YouTube. They actually tried to find out, like, what are you talking about? Our material is indecent or whatever, or defies community standards. It's our community. Like, what are you talking about? And anyway, they finally got a hold of a person, right, to talk about it, and they had a lawyer that took up the case, and they were going to file the case, right? They lost the case, and we'll get to that in a minute. But because it's proprietary. But in the process, the attorney found out that when they went to this person and said, well, why are you censoring our work? And the person said, engineer person, whatever, some mucky muck over on YouTube, said, we're not censoring your content. That's the algorithms. Oh. So, who's programming the algorithm? I don't know, some people over maybe in India, or people in Silicon Valley, or we don't always know. Somebody does that stuff, they know what they're doing. And so in the process of the case, it came out that it's like, these are written by people who are flawed and biased, garbage in, garbage out. They couldn't do anything about it because YouTube didn't have to tell them anything about the algorithm. They had to tell about anybody who does it. Oh, well, that's, if you got triggered, that's just how it is. And we don't have to tell you how it happened, next case. And so that's what we're up against. That's why, and in fact, in this book, this just came out, Censorship, Digital Media, and the Global Crackdown. We have a chapter in this book on censorship by proxy and moral panics, where we talk about Google, YouTube, Meta, Facebook, Instagram, all this stuff. Timothy Garton Ash wrote a book in 2016 about this, and he said, Google may not be a country, but it's a superpower. Though Google, Facebook, Twitter, and other media entities lack the formal legal authority of sovereign nation states, quote, their capacity to enable or limit freedom of information and expression is greater than that of most states. To analyze how freedom of expression is shaped by a complex interplay between government and corporate powers and interests, we have developed a concept of censorship by proxy. Me, Andy Lee Roth, Avram Anderson, the folks who did this book with us at Project Censored, Robin Anderson, Nolan Higdon, Steve Masick. And we talk about censorship by proxy, which describes restrictions on freedom of information, number one, are undertaken by private corporations, which 2, exceed limits on governmental censorship, and 3, serve both corporate and government or third-party interests. So it's not legally considered prior restraint, it's not legally considered a violation of the First Amendment, and it's not technically a violation of press freedom. Because the court said so, and the regulatory captured agencies said so, and so they've rewritten the definitions, and they pretend to call it freedom of the press, free speech, and an open society anyway. But we have been deconstructing how it is not, which is what makes it incredibly Orwellian with the unfortunate elements of Aldous Huxley on the side. We live in a massive tethered surveillance state where we are slaves to our own desires. That's where Huxley comes in. That he wrote in the 30s that we would come to glorify technology that served our pleasure. And in the process, we would stupefy ourselves while we're being surveilled so that they can keep spoon feeding it to us. Now I feel like I'm talking about William Burroughs and the Naked Lunch. But it's not that people aren't paying attention and seeing this, it's that it is requiring an extraordinary amount of scholarship, of research, of criticism, of questioning to actually begin to ferret out what the new architecture of censorship is. And this is it, right? This is it. And when you get people now that are desperate because they rely on this, they don't want TikTok to go away. I mean, that's the interesting backfire effect of what's happening right now. There's tens of thousands, millions of businesses in this country that rely on TikTok. Right? And so these idiots in Congress that are just spoon-fed whatever they're supposed to say from their paymasters, right? China's bad, say that. Okay. Now it's backfiring because people in their own constituencies and their own communities are saying, what kind of moron are you? You're going to put us out of business. And then they have to go back to Congress and say, I don't know, man. I don't think this TikTok ban is maybe such a great idea after all. And again, yes, Wes.
Are there any heroes in Congress who believe?
No. That's a quick end of their question.
On the media that we're talking about?
No.
Who agree with what we're talking about? Ro Khanna, how about him? He's not there?
He's in Silicon Valley. He's part of the problem.
Is he?
Yeah.
Okay.
Look.
Well, he's a brave man.
Are there better people? Yes. But is there someone that's really good on these issues consistently?
Is there anybody, is
No.
what I said. And you said no.
There's not anybody that's making this their issue and championing it to the end. No.
I know that.
There isn't.
In Congress, they'd be foolish to do that.
But
They'd
you
never
asked
get
the
elected
question,
again.
so I answered it.
Yeah.
Are there people doing things that do make differences?
Is
Yes,
there
of
a
course.
hero for this media change?
Not in Congress.
That's what I asked.
I answered it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that's the answer. Bernie Sanders has done some good things. I know people in the squad have done important things.
We got a Senator Merkley who's pretty damn good.
Yeah, you have some people
He
in this
speaks
state
out.
that do good things, but then again, well, Oregon is an interesting state. It's got a lot of extreme kind of ideological positions.
You ever
Which-
spend any time in Klamath County?
I live out of Sacramento. Okay,
I
I
know.
don't just live in the bubble of Berkeley and North County. I
know.
moved to Sacramento.
I know Sacramento.
So I live out of Sacramento, and it is not the Bay Area. I
Yeah,
can
you
tell
were
you.
sure right there.
And which I like, right? But I mean, I'm very familiar with. I just drove through the state of Jefferson on my way here. I'm very aware of that. But I'm also aware of the fact that not every libertarian person is a QAnon shaman. I'm also aware that not everybody that's screaming about the problems of fascism everywhere is a card-carrying member of Antifa in Portland, right? What I'm getting at here is that those views are important, but those are not the views of most people. Those views don't even inform most people. If anything, they repel them, right? Because they attract the person that doesn't like it more than they attract somebody that sees something positive in it. And ultimately, that backfires, which is what we talk about in this book, Let's Agree to Disagree. We talk about how when we become so strident and so sure of ourselves that there's only one way to go about things, that we stop remembering to work with others to meet them where they are, to collectively meet a lot of our needs together. We all, I don't care if you're the furthest dyed-in-the-wool red stater or blue stater, you need clean water. Almost no community in this country really has great clean water. It isn't just Flint. My point is there's tens of thousands of cities across this country that have contaminated water,
The Medford
okay?
water is
It's
the
not
best in
just
the whole
Flint.
Northwest.
Who's doing something about it? Well, you got to go to the local communities. But Flint, we knew Flint 10 years ago, and it's still just as bad as it was then. Why is that? Collapse of the infrastructure, collapse of media, collapse of civic education, and a lack of ability of people to change the system, and a rise in cynicism that has left people thinking that no one cares and no one will do anything anymore. And that's part of the problem that you need to turn around. That's why local community newspapers can help turn that around, right? That's why not only speaking to the choir is a way to be turning those things around, because you realize that other people singing in other choirs, you can harmonize with them too, right? Maybe you won't be in a major key, maybe it'll be in a minor key. Maybe you'll throw in some diminished sevenths, but they do resolve somewhere in the end, right? My point is that we don't know this until we go and play with other people. And when we are controlled by fear, and when we fear other people, we're less likely to play with them. And I don't mean that only figuratively. I actually mean it literally. We as a society don't really know how to play anymore. Our kids were sent to schools where they weren't playing anymore, right? They were being put in rows, they were taking tests, they're being taught to fear everybody, right? That's negative, and when that's inculcated into younger people, they don't always grow up to be really well-adjusted adults. And this is why I go back to education. We wrote The Media and Me, which is another book over there. We got several books over there if you're interested in them. The Media and Me is what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow. So we talked a little bit about problems. We did hear a lot about local solutions, and we talked a little bit about that. But tomorrow, I'm going to talk about critical media literacy education and why it's not just for young people, but it's for parents, it's for teachers, it's for community members. It's for anybody that wants to unlearn some of the dysfunctional things maybe that we have experienced in our lives and in our societies and in our communities, so that we remember that we, the people, can do something about it. But we have to sometimes put aside some of our differences, which can be very difficult, and we do have to keep the eyes on the prize. That means elevating the community, right? We all need air to breathe, water to drink, shelter. We all need these things, right? And what we've seen is a lot of these major corporations have come and sullied the water, sullied the environment. They've sullied our healthcare systems to make them manage disease systems. They've sullied education by teaching to a test rather than reminding kids to play and be creative. This has all happened because, well, we've apparently let it. It didn't just happen on its own. And we have to remember that we need 10 people like you and 10 people like everybody else in this room that goes out and talks to 10 other people. And even if you only get one of those 10 people, you got another person on the team, and you got another person to go out with to another 20 people and get 2 more. And that's just the way things work. We have to get off of the FaceTime, face screen, Facebook, and have literal FaceTime in the community with people. Which is why, I still come to places like this. Which is why I still drive places or fly places and go places, even though I can Zoom all over town. I can Zoom all over the globe. It's not the same. I mean, granted, it's better than nothing, but it's not like this. It's not like being invited to your community to have somebody come into here and talk to you about these issues and work to frame them in ways that can be useful for people that live here. Because what you have here is a special place. And it's an honor for me to be here. It's an honor for me to be invited. And tomorrow, I'm going to talk a lot about how critical media literacy education is for everybody, public interest journalism is for everybody, and we can all do it. And tomorrow, we'll talk all about that. I'll even break out the book and some lists, and I'll give you a whole bunch of ideas and exercises and things that you can do right here. Right? Jason tried really hard to get me into the school, trying to talk to more teachers. That book that I was talking about was picked up by the 2nd largest district in the country for staff development, right? That's a big deal. That's how you start making those changes, is you get this into the hands of people that they don't have all the time. Teachers don't have all the time to read and do it all.
Colleges or any of them in Oregon, that are working with your Project Censored?
Not right now, but I would love it if SOU or the local community college or others would do that, and we revolve. We have people coming in and out of the system all the time. Tomorrow night, I'll talk about how you can easily be part of our program and get a teacher in your local school working with us. I will donate books. I've donated books to schools. I will do whatever it takes to get people to do this in the classroom and really start making a difference.
SOU has your books in the library.
Yep, well, good. I will donate more.